I've always had a knack for staying out of trouble. It's difficult to explain, but whether it be a feeling, a sense, a tingling, it's always been there for as long as I can remember. I wish I could say it always made sense, or that there was always a aha moment where I understood what just happened, or even that it was a little less terrifying when it happens, but that's rarely the case. I just know it always seems to work. I'd like to tell you about one of the less vague times it happened to me. Back in my early 20s, in the late 1990s, I decided I needed a change. I left my childhood home and moved in with my uncle on the other side of the state for a couple of months. Enough time to get a job, find an apartment, and get myself situated for college. This was a big move for me. I'd spent a lot of time traveling, but I'd never lived more than 10 miles away from where I was born. It was both exciting and scary. Scales tipped more towards exciting. We lived in a backwoods town few people have heard of, even now, but close to a few major cities in Florida. When I told people where I lived, I just said between Gainesville and St. Augustine, rather than go through the "you live where" conversation. It's a rural area, not much more than red clay and a bunch of drying up lakes well past their prime. When giving people directions to the house, we actually told them, every turn you come to, just take one with a hard road. The first intersection without a hard road, turn right. 2 blocks past that on the left. It's the only house on that side. I don't think I ever learned the names of all those roads on the way home. I just aimed for the hard roads. The house was pretty secluded. I don't think there was much neighborhood behind the house, just woods. The property sat on an intersection of clay roads with woods across the street to the front and one side of the house. The other side was an empty lot, and then more woods. I remember it was a pretty big yard, maybe a half acre or so, completely enclosed with a chain link fence. The house sat right in the middle of the property. If you walked to the front edge of the yard inside the fence, you could see the neighbor's driveway a little farther up the road on the other side. My uncle loved the place, not being able to see or hear anyone in any direction. I thought it was creepy as hell. It was a small house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The living room had 2 exit doors, one to the front and one to the side. Each let out to a large porch. I know it's not a good thing, but I'm a smoker. Like a freight train kind of smoker. It's a family thing. An unhealthy curse handed down by each generation. It's like you weren't even considered an adult until you sat on Grandma's porch and smoked with her. That's how you spent time with Grandma. You sat on the porch, chain smoked, and talked about whatever needed talking about. I sure do miss that woman. I've never cared for smoking in the house, and my uncle was trying to quit. So we set up a little smoking table and a couple of chairs on his front porch. He was an early to rise and early to bed kind of guy, and I was just the opposite. I didn't go to bed until 2 or 3 each morning, then slept in until 10 or 11. The hours you keep working at a restaurant, I guess. So I spent most of my evenings after work on the porch, usually reading a book or talking on the phone to friends back home. There wasn't much road traffic to speak of, even less after I came in from work. It was summer, and my cousin, my uncle's son from his first marriage, had come to spend a couple of weeks with his dad. We're a pretty tight-knit family, so the kid, aka little man, was more my little brother than my cousin. He was around 4 or 5 years old at the time. The house only had the 2 bedrooms, so we set up a pallet of blankets on the floor in the living room for him. I made a fort of it every night before he went to sleep, stretching the sheet between the couch and the coffee table over his head. There were big windows next to either of the doors going outside, and the blinds were old and kind of dog-chewed, so he liked to be covered up at night. I wasn't sure if it was so he couldn't see outside, or if he was worried something was outside seeing him. Either way, I could sympathize. On this particular night, I put him to bed and retired to the front porch. I called a friend of mine back home and proceeded to talk the night away. Kinda weird, the things we did before cell phones. We actually talked to people. I miss it sometimes. It was a typical warm southern night. Mid-80s temperature, not a breath of breeze, and humid. Nights out there could really go either way. You either had a cacophony of frogs, crickets, katydids, and the occasional alligator. Or worse, you couldn't hear yourself think over the silence. The chorus of nightlife was going strong that evening, which is actually pretty cool. If you've never heard it, each type of insect and critter sings together, matching the rest in volume and cadence. And then one crescendos, briefly shutting out the others before going back down to rejoin the others. Every so often, you'll hear a couple of competing solos, or duets, louder and louder until one wears out. It's almost background stuff, and you usually tune it out. But it's neat to stop and listen. Until it just stops. And that's how it started. I'm talking on the phone, mostly listening, honestly. The critters are singing in the background, and I remember feeling just the briefest chill. Not enough to really notice at first. But then, everything went quiet. It didn't fade or lower in volume. It stopped. The chill settled in. She was still talking. I could hear her voice in my ear. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring into the wooded lot across the street. There wasn't anything to see over there, but I couldn't look away. I don't know if it was my uncle, a previous owner, or maybe the country. But there was a sodium vapor streetlight in front of the house, just outside of the chain link fence, a little to my right as I stared out there. It gave a decent amount of light to the front of the house and was really nice when you were bringing groceries in from your car after dark. But this night really underscored my issue with the light. The bulb itself was mounted directly to the pole, rather than extending away from it. An extension of some kind would have provided more light in every direction, I think. The way the bulb housing hugged the pole itself, though, hard shadows ran behind the pole across the street, complete darkness spreading in roughly a 90-degree arc behind the light pole. I guess it's the juxtaposition of the light versus the dark in that part of the yard. But the space behind the pole was the darkest part of the night. And that's where I was looking. I tried to shake it off. Admittedly, I can get creeped out pretty easily. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and I know I can scare myself without much help. So I tried to just ignore it and get back into the conversation. I opened my mouth to say something, to chime into whatever we were talking about with something witty, I'm sure. Be quiet. It's not really a voice, but it sometimes comes across as one. I knew there was no one actually talking to me, just my brain reacting to and dealing with something. So, I'm well aware it's my own head when I hear a voice like that, just to be clear. But when I do hear it, I listen. This is that thing I mentioned when I started. What always keeps me out of trouble. It wasn't the first time I heard it. I could hear my friend going on and on through the phone at my ear, but it was distant. I could also hear something across the street. That was the summer of 1998, and it was a North Florida summer marked by drought and fires. The underbrush was dry and crisp. Something over there had just taken a step through it. I didn't really know what to do. I could feel my heart beating in my temples. It felt like something was looking at me, through me. It was uncomfortable and more than a little invasive feeling. I didn't like it. I wanted to go inside. Don't move. Okay, we aren't moving. Check. Done. She was telling me about a new restaurant back home, how she and a few of her other friends had been and liked it a lot. We needed to go when I could visit again, and she stopped by to see my mom, and the other day had a great time at the house. I can hear her. A dry twig cracked under its weight. I couldn't just hang up on her. If I did, she was going to call back. It struck me as a very bad thing to have the phone ring while I was out here. My hand was shaking, holding the phone to my head. "Wendy, I have to go," I whispered to her. She went to say something else, but I cut her off. "That thing just happened right now. I have to go. Something's out here. I'll call you later." "Be careful," she said, and hung up. She and I were close friends, had been for years, and she knew what I meant. I clicked the phone off and put it on the table. It was one of those big, curved cordless models with a stubby little antenna. I remember them being very popular back then. Worried she would call back, or I'd be killed because of some weird wrong number calling at 2 o'clock in the morning, I flipped the ringer to off. Another step from across the street, and then another. It was walking faster now. It was definitely closer than when I first heard it. I braced myself, ready to jump up from the chair and run into the house. "Don't. It's watching." So, I didn't. I listened. I can't even explain how much I wanted to just up and run right then. There was an exhalation. I don't really know how to explain it. Not a snort or a grunt, but a hard exhalation. And then a scrape. Another step. "Get inside." I damn near turned the table over as I jumped up from the chair and ran for the door. It was only a few steps, but it seemed like I'd never make it. And it really didn't help that I could hear the thing across the street break into a run. Twigs and branches, snapping and crunching. Something broke over there, I guess, as it ran through a brush or a low-hanging branch. Now, it was outside of the woods. There was a thumping as its feet hit the hard-baked clay road. Right as I made it inside the door and got it shut behind me, I heard the clang of the chain-link fence as something hit its top rail, surely vaulting over top and into our yard. "Lock the door." I'd barely turned the deadlock in the door when the voice came again. "Turn off the light." The single light in the living room was from a weirdly elaborate light fixture attached to the ceiling fan. I called it the Venus flytrap, with the strange flowery stained glass petals surrounding the bulbs, which always tinted the light to a pale green. I grabbed the pull cord and killed the light. Slam! Something hit the door from outside. It sounded like whatever had been running at me just headbutted the door. That was the picture in my head, at least. I don't know how I didn't make a noise. It scared me so bad. The blinds shook in the window beside the door, a dry rustling sound as they rubbed the wood in the frame. Hide. I thought about going to my room, which was the furthest point in the house from that door, but my cousin was sound asleep on the living room floor. I wasn't about to leave him out there by himself, but Waking him up seemed like just as bad an idea. Another angry pounding against the door. The blind shook again. I wondered how securely fastened they were to the top of the frame. What if they fell off the window and I ended up face to face with some thing outside, staring at me? All I could think was that if that happened, the streetlight would be to its back, lighting up the house, and I wouldn't be able to see it with a light in my eyes. I don't know why I even thought about that, but it scared the hell out of me. I got down on the floor and climbed into the fort we'd made earlier, between the couch and the coffee table. It seemed as good a spot as any. Little man stirred a bit as I settled next to him, but he didn't wake up. More banging on the porch. Sounded like the table was being dragged, pulled across the wood floor out there. Another bang. And under all that, the best word to describe it: breathing. It was somewhere between a snort or a growl, something out of breath. A quick snarl punctuated by more banging furniture. It slammed against the door again, growled. To say I was scared is a monstrous understatement. I didn't know what the hell to do. What if it stopped hitting the door and started hitting the window? The voice in my head was quiet though. As much as I could, I just trusted it would be saying something if there was anything I should be doing, and laughed at myself for waiting on the voices in my head to tell me what to do. I probably didn't laugh right at that exact moment, but you get the idea. It jumped off the porch. I don't really know how to explain that sound, except that you could hear and feel its weight on the wood planks out there. And then it was not there. Straining my ears to hear something, anything. All I could think was that it was gone. It was going to leave us alone. Slam. This one from the door to the side of the living room. I didn't hear it over there before it hit the door. I think I might have yelped or something when it hit. Little man shook a bit, but he was still sleeping. A couple more scrapes and bangs outside, and now it was panting. Again, I'm wondering about that window. It felt like luck that it didn't hit the one on the front porch. Too much to hope for that it wouldn't find the one on the side porch. But it didn't. Maybe a minute or two later, or really, my perception of time was so screwed up it could have been half a minute or a half hour. It was gone. I heard it jump down again. Its breathing faded. I braced myself for another bang, but all was quiet. I don't know how long I lay there, hugging little man to me, not really sure who was comforting who for that next little while. I eventually fell asleep, waking up to the smell of breakfast and coffee. The previous night came back to me pretty quickly. I was happy to see everyone up and around. Both my uncle and little man were up and around already, and I felt more than just a little silly climbing out from under the blanket fort built in the living room. My uncle just grinned at me, said he'd slept in the living room with a little guy a few times himself. I went for the door, really needing that first smoke of the morning. Felt like I'd earned it. Little man stopped me on the way out, surprised me, just came up and hugged me. I had to kneel down to catch him, so he wasn't hugging my knees. It was a good hug, deep and heartfelt. He pulled away from me, looked at me like I don't think a kid has ever looked at me. "I'm really glad you're okay," he said. "I had a bad dream that you were outside and got eaten by the monster across the street." I think all my blood froze right then. I don't know if I wanted to laugh or cry. I told him I was just fine, no monsters for me. They don't think I taste good. He laughed and was done with it. He was back in the kitchen helping his dad with breakfast, and I really needed to smoke. It was my last scare of the morning, but it was a good one. Not really sure what I was expecting, but the yard around the house looked like a war zone. My smoking table was in pieces, parts of it in the front of the house, other parts on the side of the house, and one of the legs was out in the road. One of the chairs was near disintegrated. We never found the other one. We kept a big metal bucket full of sand on the side of the front porch, the butt bucket. It was on its side in the far back corner of the yard. It weirded me out that the sand and collection of butts previously inside the bucket were nowhere near the house or the bucket, but in the far corner of the yard. No matter how many times I've thought this through, that part never really made much sense. How did that thing get the bucket to the backyard? Why were the contents dumped in the front yard? What the hell was it that it could have carried the bucket to the front to dump it? My uncle saw me checking out the front yard, came out to the front door to join me. I remember he whistled when he came out, surprised to see the yard. It's funny now, and I think I nervous laughed then. He asked if I was throwing parties after he went to bed every night. He cocked an eyebrow at me and rubbed at a fresh dent in the front door. Not quite. I wasn't sure what to do still, so I told him everything that happened the night before. To be honest, I really thought he was going to laugh at me, make fun of me for my overactive imagination, and I was never going to hear the end of it. He didn't. Instead, he told me he'd had a couple of weird things happen to him out there. Said it really bothered him coming home after dark, that he hated not being able to see across the street because of that street light, and that he'd seen things on the edge of the fence, but mostly across the street. We went back inside and he showed me where he kept 2 of his rifles and 1 of his handguns. Well out of sight, but easy to reach in a hurry. We went back out and cleaned the mess left in the yard. He said that with a national forest on just about all sides of us, there were a lot of animals we weren't used to out there. There were plenty of bobcats, coyotes, panthers, even bears, and God only knew what else. I agreed, taking some comfort in that. My overactive imagination paired with a real-life animal. Yeah, that was going to be scary. And I really wished he'd stopped there. I think it's something else though, he said. Whatever it is out here feels smarter than that. I think it knows us. I don't think I'll ever forget him saying that. I tried to get him to say more, but he wouldn't, and he wouldn't ever speak about it again. I was only there another couple of weeks, thankfully uneventful weeks. When I left, I never went back to that house. Something about it after that night just didn't feel right. I wish I'd more to tell you, or a better explanation for what happened that night.